Imbolc blessings, everyone. My name is Dr. Corey Wren, and this is Mishka. And Imbolc is here. Imbolc is upon us, and in some ways, it's one of the least vegan of the Sabbats. But let me take you through some of the history, because actually, Imbolc traditionally was practiced vegan. Imbolc is Gaelic for in the belly, and this really harkens on the Celtic traditions of Imbolc, basically held around the end of January, beginning of February, usually February 1st or 2nd. Personally, I celebrated January 31st through the 1st, and in the United States, it coincides with Groundhog Day, which is pretty much the same sort of idea, this idea that the end of winter is upon us, and how much more until we get springtime and sun returning. So Imbolc is a much older tradition that would become Groundhog's Day, and also later would be co-opted by Christians and turned into Candlemas, which is the same. It's basically the same thing, bringing light into the dead of winter, and usually celebrated with candlelight. And that's intended to signify the return of the sun. The days are starting to get a little bit longer. The 10 darkest weeks of the year are now past us here in the Northern Hemisphere. And so really looking forward to a new solar season. So because Imbolc is based on an old Celtic tradition, a lot of these old Sabbats were ways of honoring and marking the turning of the agricultural seasonal wheel of the year. So that is usually not so great for non-human animals. So when we say Imbolc in the belly, oftentimes that's actually literally referring to the lambs that are in the mama ewes. And so there's a quickening of life, not just in nature more broadly, but in the livestock. And sadly, we know that this quickening of life, birthed unto the world around equinox season, then becomes mass slaughter. And the Easter season, which has been co-opted by the Christians, unfortunately has a lot of child sacrifice, because ultimately that's where a lot of the lambs meet their fate. The lambing industry in the UK, and I can't really speak to in the US, although it happens in the US, the UK has a very unique relationship with sheep. But because of this penchant for eating baby lambs, the Imbolc season actually has been pushed further and further back to where ewes are having their babies earlier in the winter, and this creates a really high fatality rate. Something like a fourth of the babies don't make it because they are born vulnerable, small, weak, and they succumb to the weather. And now, of course, with climate change, the winters are getting more severe, and summers, of course, are getting more severe. So it's not actually a very nice time, and I think it's very important then for vegan witches to find joy in this rebirth, find joy in the renewal, but also to hold space for the reality of what's happening to lambs, to calves, and other species. It's not just sheep. Now, here's where the vegan bit comes in, not just in recognizing that, but also, I think, focusing on the fact that the earth itself is turning. Before we came along with our animal agriculture and the evil of domestication, the earth itself was entering a moment of quickening, a period of quickening, where I'm seeing, for instance, outside, my snowdrops and my daffodils and my bluebells are starting to poke up out of the soil and gearing up for a beautiful springtime. And my compost pile is also fermenting and doing its thing. And all across the forests and the fields and the water systems, everyone's gearing up for another solar season. So we don't have to celebrate Imbolc by focusing on this artificial, more recent tradition of animal agriculture, which is rooted in violence. We can look earlier than that to the seasonal changes that nature has always been engaging with, and we can align with that instead. But here's the other bit that I really wanted to emphasize. This was a time of paucity and scarcity and even famine. And so there was this early tradition during the Imbolc season of fasting. And that meant no animal products, because all the slaughtering has been done. The last big slaughtering was done around winter solstice to celebrate, the turning of the sun. The major one, of course, was Samhain. But now, by this time of year, we're not slaughtering animals so much anymore. Now we're waiting on the animals to renew a new population, and there's no milk because the babies aren't really to term yet. So it's a very plant-based existence. People are relying on stored fruits, stored nuts, preserved root vegetables, and all that kind of stuff, and maybe some preserved meats. But honestly, people weren't eating a lot of animal products to begin with in these early modern, pre-modern eras because they were so resource intensive. So people, we know from archaeological research, people are eating mostly plant-based, even vegan diets. That was the norm. Eating animal products was a rare treat. It was not something that was part of the early medieval diet on a daily basis. Absolutely not. And by the way, beyond the British Isles, we know that to be the case as well. It's simply true that raising non-human animals to kill them for their flesh or to use their breast milk is an extremely resource-intensive industry and not available to most people. It usually was a marker of status. So wealthier people had more access to these things. So this is an interesting area where we, if we want to, as vegan witches, really honor these traditions. And that's what witchcraft, a lot of it is about, is getting in touch with our ancestors, getting in touch with early ways of humans living with nature before all the trappings of modernization and industrialization, rationalization, even androcentrism and all those types of things, these false cultural impositions that have created a lot of inequality and divorced us from nature. If we want to get in touch with that, we don't have to stop 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago. We can go further back into a time when people were eating more plant-based all the time, and eating and raising animals for food in a domesticated way was non-existent, and then rare, and then, not to the extent that we do it today, and certainly not to the extent we were doing it 1,000, 2,000 years ago. But we can also embrace those vegan traditions that were in place more recently, the time that a lot of witchcraft was drawing on, which tends to be the Iron Age or the Stone Age. So, in the Bronze Age. So this is a time when people are not eating a lot of animal products anyway. We don't have to go that far back into time. And we can see that through the archaeological evidence that this is the way. Now, we should be careful with that, though. Just because it's something that was practiced years ago doesn't mean that it's necessarily good or bad or authentic or not, because witchcraft is always a cultural construction, a creative reclaiming. And so we can bring some things back that we think may be good for us, and maybe leave some things behind. And so I'm inviting us to leave behind killing animals for their flesh, and killing animals for their breast milk, and killing animals for their babies, and killing the babies. Like, this is something that we should leave behind. In fact, Imbolc is not just a time where people were eating vegan. A lot of people were actually practicing fasting at this time, because it wasn't just that animal products were scarce. A lot of the other foodstuffs that have been stored from the summer and autumn seasons are now dwindling, and so a lot of fasting would have been taking place at this time. This is one of the reasons why they think, for instance, that Christianity, especially Catholicism, imparted on these older pagan traditions this idea of Lent. So, and this is something that I researched for my book, Animals in Irish Society, is that we have this major stereotype about Irish people and the Celtic tradition as being very laden with animal products, but actually that was not the case. Most Irish people, and again, this is supported by anthropological, archaeological, and historical records, were not eating animal products, in some cases not eating them at all. And when Christianity, Catholic tradition, was put into place in Ireland, and Ireland today, of course, remains a very Catholic country, there were strict regulations on what you could and could not eat and when. And so when Lent came around, which is the Imbolc season, and Lent doesn't let up until till the spring equinox, right? So during that time, people were not to eat animal flesh at all. At all. No milk, no fish, no eggs, no flesh at all. They were to eat vegan. Now, this comes with a lot of Christian trappings about, practicing asceticism and spiritual purity. But what we think is the case here is that this is actually imparting religious beliefs, Christian beliefs, on a much older pagan tradition that was practical, because in the Northern Hemisphere at this time, there wasn't a lot of food to go around. And so people practiced fasting as a measure of sustaining their foodstuffs and survival. Interestingly, the words for several days of the week in Gaelic, which I won't butcher here, actually have that heritage in them. So the the word for Wednesday and Friday, I believe, all have some kind of Gaelic meaning for not eating, for fasting. And so this was something that would go on throughout the year, not just during Lent, but there'd be certain days of the week that you didn't eat meat, you didn't eat dairy. And it was only more recently in the Middle Ages that these laws started to be relaxed. And so fish was introduced, for instance. But it persisted well into till recent times. In fact, people still do practice veganism or plant-based eating during Lent. But interestingly, during the famine times, when there was multiple famines in Ireland, most notoriously the big potato blight in the 1840s, but when people came with food relief, they would find that even starving people would refuse to eat food that was given to them if it had animal products on certain days because of their religious tenacity. So that political veganism, that cultural veganism, persisted through Celtic traditions as it Christianized all the way up until today. When you look at Advent as well, Advent around Christmas time, that also calls for fasting and for vegan eating. So that is my argument here, is that when we're looking at Imbolc, actually Imbolc has a long vegan tradition. It has stuck with us for a very long time and has actually become Christianized. And I think as vegan witches, we can embrace that and reclaim that practice as something that is very much so normal and natural for, British people of the British Isles to have done. And today we can add to that and say that it's not just a matter of necessity. We don't need to fast anymore out of necessity. And it's not necessarily out of religiosity. If you're watching this, you probably are interested in witchcraft and paganism, not necessarily Christianity. Now we can bring on in our own new traditions and say that actually this is part of a spiritual, ecofeminist, pagan relationship with nature that is respectful and magical. There's something magical about eating vegan and plant-based. In fact, there's a lot of discussion of that in the witchcraft literature, which I cover in my book, Vegan Witchcraft. Personally, I've been adding to my 25 years plus of veganism by adding in my own version of fasting for the Imbolc season. So I've been doing intermittent fasting. And there are lots of spiritual reasons and health reasons why one would do that, which aren't necessarily related to the vegan part, but it's another way that, as contemporary people, we can meld modern day science and evidence about the benefits of intermittent fasting with these older spiritual pagan practices. And of course, the last bit is Imbolc is all about that recognition of the turning of the seasons, the turning of the sun, practice with candles. And so I would be remiss if I didn't mention before parting with you guys today that when we do practice Imbolc and bring in the sun's warmth in that candle, making sure that we're not, again, glorifying and romanticizing traditional ways by introducing speciesism into our vegan practice. So making sure that our candle wax is eco, that it's soy or anything but beeswax, basically, because beeswax is actually not all that great for the environment. And if you want to learn more, you can check out the Vegan Society and the research that they present on how the industrial honey industry is actually really, really bad for the environment. But also, more importantly, it's bad for bees. And we have this misnomer that using bee products is actually good for bees and that bees are respected. This is actually quite a myth. And I'll be posting more videos about this, the politics of bees and witchcraft. And I've already got some speckled throughout my other videos. But I think an easy way to start is to veganize our candles and make sure we're using plant-based products that are ecological, sustainable, and are able to connect us to that old tradition and also the coming of the sun without having to sacrifice animals. So I hope you found that this video is very helpful and interesting. And if you want to learn more about veganizing witchcraft, definitely subscribe to this channel. I post new content every single week. Definitely subscribe and hit the little bell and you'll get a notification when I post new stuff. And of course, like the video and share it if you can. When I'm doing the radical work of veganism on YouTube, the algorithm isn't necessarily on my side. So when you engage with the content, it does help the channel to grow. And I want to keep getting the good word out there about how we can do witchcraft without hurting others. So blessed Imbolc season to you. I hope that you have a great one. My big spring clean that I do every Imbolc is almost over, and my intermittent fasting, my internal spring clean, is still chugging along, and I'm really looking forward to equinox. Keep it vegan and keep it witchy.